Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. Today I am quilting our Scrappy Pinwheel block with a super spiral. And this is one of those designs that is actually the easiest if you use walking foot quilting. So let's jump on the machine and learn more about this super simple form of quilting. So I'm here on my machine and this is the Eversewn Sparrow 20 and I have set it up to have a normal straight stitch with the needle in the middle position, and I need to bump up my stitch length to the length that I want to quilt at. And because I'm doing walking foot quilting, this is going to be 2mm stitch length. A walking foot uses the stitch length setting on your machine plus the feed dogs on your machine to feed the quilt forward. And for this reason, I've taken my queen size Supreme slider and I've repositioned it. Let me slide this off so you can see. I've repositioned it so it's off the feed dogs completely, so that way the feed dogs in the foot can grip and move the quilt really easily. If I'm just doing free motion quilting or ruler foot quilting, it would be a very different setup. So please understand these are the settings and how I set up my machine for this style of quilting. Okay, now for a super spiral, I want to start in the center and work my way out. And I have marked this with my ceramic marking pencil, and you can check out both my machine and the marking pencil at my website, leahday.com. So I've gotten started and marked this out, and then I'm leaving about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter between these lines of quilting, so that way my block will be quilted nicely, but not too stiff. Now there's a reason why I bothered marking this. I could possibly be able to stitch it without the marks, but it's really important to have your spiral turning clockwise like this, like the hands of a clock. And the reason is, as you quilt more and more of it, you will be quilting with the less and less of the block in the arm of the machine. If you do it the other way, you will end up with more and more of the quilt in the arm of the machine with every pass. It's one of those hard lessons to learn, and I have found that I oftentimes get started the wrong way, so I always mark the block to get started. So I slipped on my quilting gloves, which will help me get a good grip of the quilt. And then now I'm just going to pick my starting point. And yes, you can start dead on in the center of the block of that pinwheel right there, but I kind of like the idea of just starting out right here so I don't have to mess with stitching through that big bulky seam allowance. Okay, so what I just did right there, that was pretty quick. I dropped my needle into the down position using my hand wheel. I brought it all the way up, and then I tugged on the top thread to bring up my bobbin thread, and I tuck both of those thread tails underneath the foot, and that has become such an unconscious habit. I do it without even thinking about it. And what that does, bringing your bobbin thread up like that, it's just really good habit to get into because it ensures that you're not going to make a mess on the back of your quilt. You know, that bobbin thread can look really unsightly if you stitch over it a lot. I'm going to cut these thread tails just a little shorter. I do want to tie off and bury them just as soon as I can. But right now, I just need to leave them here and keep moving them out of my way as I stitch this starting spiral. And I will say, this is the hardest part of the spiral. Right when you get started, this is the slowest. And a lot of quilters start out by doing this part of the spiral at the very beginning with free motion quilting, and then they switch to the walking foot a little further along. I want you to see that it is possible to get started. You're just going to have to do a good bit of shifting and moving of the quilt. And you can see I'm kind of rolling it up here, kind of turning it into a little bit of a burrito or a pastry. There we go. And then I can take 1 or 2 stitches, and then I'm just lightly pivoting the quilt, just like so. And I just want to form that nice smooth curve. I'll roll that up a bit here. There we go. There we go. And that stitch is actually looking a little on the chunky side to me, so I'm going to drop that down to 1.5mm. If ever you're looking at your stitches and you're just thinking, man, that stitch looks just a little bit big, and you're using your walking foot, well, you can control that. All you have to do is just lower your stitch length. Now, conversely, if your stitches, if you feel like they look really tiny, then you can improve that by just making the stitch length go bigger. And that does not work, I should say, for free motion quilting or ruler foot quilting, because in that situation, that speed is being controlled by the movement of your hands and the speed of your machine running. With walking foot quilting, this is the machine doing the work. And I want you to see what I mean by that. I'm going to take my hands off the quilt, and you see how it moves even when my hands don't touch it. Now it tends to stitch in a straight line, so I need to get back to my spiral, but you get the idea. It's the machine and the foot doing the work here, and that's why your stitch length setting will always adjust your stitch. So if you don't like it, then you can change it. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Yeah, those beginning stitches weren't perfect, but that's okay. Not a big deal. And like I said, if you were looking in that and just decided that you wanted to get started a little differently, then you could just get started with free motion quilting instead and then switch out. There we go. Now you probably are wondering at this stage what to do with those thread breaks, and this is what I do with those thread breaks every single time. I take the two thread tails and I hold them together. I tie an overhand knot, nice and secure. I do not bring that knot down all the way to the surface of the quilt because I want to tie it off and bury it inside the middle layer of the quilt. And I find if I bring the knot down too close, then it will not pop into the middle layer. So here we go. I'm running a cheater needle. This is a self-threading needle that makes it a lot easier to thread. I've run it through the batting area. I'm going to flip up the quilt to check. That looks good. And now this is the cheater aspect of it. You just take the thread tail and pop it into the eye of the needle and then send it through. And I have a much more detailed, much more close-up view of that at another tutorial. You can find it at leahday.com/hide threads. So check that out if you need to learn how to do that technique. As you can see, I have turned that into a habit so much that I don't even think about it, and I can do it with my gloves on. So that is really, really handy. And I keep my cheater needle, I keep two of them just in case I lose one. I keep my cheater needle right here on a pen place. It's a little single magnet pin cushion. I just set that right on top of my machine. So that way it's nice and handy. And I don't have to go searching for that special pen every time I want to hide and bury my thread tails, which, you know, depending on the quilting design, that can be quite often. That could be once or twice in a quilt. It really just depends on the quilting design and how many times I'm breaking thread or changing thread colors. So here we go. This is really in the home stretch now. It's going to be very, very easy from here. Part of the reason why I picked this design is because it is so speedy. The slowest part is just getting everything started. You know, getting that starting spiral shape done. But once you get that stitched, then everything gets bigger, the shape gets larger, and as you can see now, I can really put my foot down. Although a walking foot is designed to walk, you can put your foot down a little bit with this design, and as long as the quilt is not, you know, banging up against your machine and limiting your motion, then you can just let it stitch and spin at the same time, and you can see just how fast this is. So I'm not too worried about this being absolutely perfectly evenly spaced. As you can see, sometimes my spiral might come in just a little bit close. Sometimes that spacing might widen out a little bit. If I had a guide bar for this walking foot, I would use it for this kind of thing. A guide bar is a bar that you can attach to the sides or the back of the foot, and that enables you to space things out and know the distance between the foot and what you're stitching and the line before it, you know, the spiral line before it here. I don't have a guide bar on this particular walking foot, so I can't do that. But what I'm doing instead is just simply eyeballing the distance. So this space here between the edge of my foot and that line, I'm just looking at that and paying attention to it and trying to roughly keep that consistent. Now, if those, you know, that distance shrinks, then I know those lines are going to come closer together. If it expands, they're going to get further apart. And that's not the end of the world. I don't think anyone's going to take a ruler to my quilt and measure it. I don't think it's that crucial that it's absolutely perfect. If this was a quilt for show and this was the start of a, you know, beautiful medallion, something like that, then I would have marked this entire thing and I'd be quilting on the marked line instead. So just understand that, you know, different types of quilting and certainly a different level of you know, perfection in different styles of quilts. In this case, you we had a really nice, fun, quick piecing design, and I wanted to follow that up with a nice, fun, quick quilting design. So that way, if you've fallen behind a little bit this month, you can catch up on all of your blocks and also be enjoying the nice weather, because it is now May, and I don't know about you, but I'm really enjoying my time outside. So this is working out really, really well. I can speed up and really let the walking foot do its thing. The only time to really worry about going too fast with the walking foot is if you start seeing, you just start seeing your stitches get really, really close together and they're not looking as good, and then all the usual issues that can crop up, that your machine is telling you that there's a problem, such as thread breaks or skip stitches, all that good stuff. That might be a sign you need to slow down and just take more time. And you can see that even though I'm running at a fairly fast speed, I'm still letting the machine and the foot do its job. If you notice that your stitches are getting really big with walking foot quilting, even when you go and adjust your stitch length over here, they're still really large. That might be a sign that you're kind of muscling the block through the machine. You're pushing it, you're giving it too much encouragement. And that's really easy to do. It's one of those unconscious things I think we can kind of slip into, just being a little bit pushy with our quilts. And if you notice that happening, go up on your fingertips. Just take a really light, just even one finger here, 1 or 2 fingers can do this job of just pivoting this quilt and making sure it's in the right location to keep that spiral going. All I have to do really is just worry about taking out these pins and smoothing things out as I go. But really, you don't need to be muscling at it. Let the walking foot walk, let the machine feed it forward, and those stitches are going to form nice and even. Now it looks like I've gotten a little bit wider on my spiral. That distance came out a little bit further than what I was wanting, so I'm going to bring that in. And I'm eyeballing that, and that distance between the foot and that line of quilting was roughly 3/4 of an inch. And I think that looks great. So I think that you could definitely go wider on this block. Now you could go with wider spacing between your lines. You could also slowly widen the lines apart, meaning they start close together and then you slowly increase that distance. Just watch the rating of your batting. That is the number on your batting. It'll say something like suggested quilting amount, or quilts beautifully up to 4 inches. Well, what that basically means is that you can't leave more than 4 inches of space open without it being secured in some way with quilting stitches. Well, my batting has a humongous rating, so this is actually quite a lot more quilting than it needs. I think it can be quilted up to 9 inches apart, so that is a really, really big rating, and it means that I could have left this entire center of the block open and not quilted anything there, and that would have been a-okay. The batting would have been able to handle it. And I get that question a lot, how much quilting does a quilt need? And the answer is always, it just depends on your batting. That's it. If you pick a batting that has a very, very small rating, such as 2.5, 3 inches, that means you're going to have to do a lot of quilting on that quilt. And if you pick a batting with a higher rating, then that means you'll have to do a lot less. And that's something to think about. If you've got a lot of quilts you want to finish in a hurry, that can be really, really helpful to just pick the right batting. Definitely shop around. And as far as the battings that I really recommend, I love Quilter's Dream and I love Hobbs. Both of those are terrific brands, and I have never been disappointed with either of them. Okay, so I'm just going to continue working my way out, and I will meet you back here when we knock out the corners, because that is always a tricky spot with a spiral design going into a square block. So I reached a point where I was on the corner and I finished the center circle, so I just need to stitch back and forth across this corner to fill it all the way in. So I'm going to stitch down, and I'm just stitching roughly about 1/4 inch away from the edge. Keep in mind, we piece these blocks big, and then we will do a victory lap, and then we'll trim them down to the exact correct size right before we connect them all together in November. So several months away still. Okay, so I'm stitching along that edge, And then I'm just keeping an eye at the distance between my edge of my foot and the line of quilting from before. And just like I said, I'm just keeping that distance in my mind, about 3/4 of an inch for my spiral. Of course, it could be closer together or wider apart for yours. So now I'm just going to get that nice spiral angle in and stitch across. And with your corners, you just want to smooth that out a little bit. You know, by this point, you're probably taking out all of your pins. So just make sure that those layers are being held nicely flat together. There we go. Okay, so this is the trickiest part, and this is what I was talking about when I said make sure your spiral is turning clockwise, because this is how it would have been at this stage with the whole block basically in the arm of your machine if you had quilted it the opposite direction. So we only have a little bit of this kind of tedious stitching in this weird direction. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Just keep an eye on that edge of your patchwork foot. When it looks like it's about the right distance, you're going to slide it, lift that foot up, angle it over so that the quilt's at the right angle to the foot. That looks good. Again, smooth everything out. You want to make sure, if you have taken your pins out, to flip that over every once in a while. Just check that, that your backing fabric isn't doing anything weird. You're not flipping it over again or something like that. I have stitched my backing fabric all sorts of crazy to my quilts. I've flipped it over, all kinds of different things. So it definitely can happen. So from here, I'm just going to stitch straight down that edge one more time. And then again, keep a look on that distance, angle the foot, and stitch that last little tip. There we go. And so as you go around your block, you'll just need to hit all 4 corners the exact same way. As I stitch the other corner, I'm just securing that edge of the block down. And that stitching just limits the fraying and, makes the block just wear just a little bit better. Of course, the best thing to do with your blocks after you get them quilted is just put them in a bin, put them somewhere out of sight, out of mind, where you won't lose them, of course, because it's going to be several more months before we're ready to put them together into our finished quilt. So I'm going to finish up this last corner, and here's what it looked like whenever I finished my Scrappy Pinwheel quilt block. So that's it for this video. I had a great time quilting this beautiful super spiral, and I think it looks just as good on the back as it does on the front. Now, if you would like to find the pattern for this Scrappy Pinwheel quilt block, you can find it at leahday.com/friendship. There you can find all of the quilt patterns I've shared so far, along with all of the quilting tutorials as well. And yes, those tutorials are going to stay online forever. So if you're just getting started now, please don't worry. You will find the tutorials and patterns available to you indefinitely, so you can work at your own pace and finish up your quilt whenever it works best for you. So come and join in the fun and begin your Friendship Sampler Quilt today. Find the patterns at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.